UFOs are real, burgeoning, not going away. I am your intrepid host somewhere deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, L.A. Marzulli. Very special guest today, Richard Dolan. This is part 2, and we'll get into that. But first, a word from our trusted sponsor. Folks, are you feeling unsure about your finances these days? Well, you're not alone. That's why Noble Gold Investments is here to help. Just hear it straight from the folks that they've helped. The Noble crew walk me through everything, no stress. With Noble Gold's help, I can finally sleep easy at night. And now this month, Noble Gold Investments is handing out a free 5-ounce silver American the Beautiful coin if you qualify for an IRA. Invest in gold and silver with Noble Gold Investments. Go to noblegoldinvestments.com now. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Folks, remember, we've invested with them, and I am really glad we did. But number to call, 877-646-5347. Once again, that's 877-646-5347. We invested with them, and I'm glad we did, especially when we look at the trillions of dollars that the United States is in debt. If it collapses, you and I both will be glad we put some of our money into gold or silver. So we were talking about, we hit a lot of different points in our first part of the interview, and obviously this is part 2, but I was invited to the Vernal Utah UFO Conference last year, and I have as I know you probably know, a different paradigm than most ufologists. I think that we're looking at are interdimensional entities coming from another domain, but be that as it may. So I asked, and I did this very deliberately just to see what the audience reaction was. So, I introduced myself, blah, 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 and I get up and I go, it was a fairly well-attended conference, about 300 people there maybe. And I asked them, I said, how many of you think it's okay to abduct a 5-year-old boy and implant him? Anybody? Raise your hand. Not a hand goes up. Never. Not a hand goes up. And I said, well, you've just proven my point. If these are the benevolent space brothers from Epsilon Eridani, then, what's really going on here? And of course, I'm speaking of the guy that we took the implant out of, the late Richard Shaw and myself, Emil Jurek. We, with the late Dr. Roger Lear, it's amazing how many people have passed, but we filmed all that, and it was high strangeness in the lab when we were trying to take, I don't even know about this, where we did CAT scans and ultrasounds and x-rays and all sorts of stuff on this thing. We knew exactly where it was in the guy's leg. And we found it again 2 weeks before we were doing the operation. We're in the operating theater, and Dr. Matriciano with the ultrasound, he can't find it. He's going over this little stretch in the guy's leg for like an hour and 20 minutes. He can't find it. It's like it's missing. So anyway, not to get religious here, but I get a little, I say this lovingly at New Age conferences because they can relate to it this way. I'm cracking myself up. I said, well, I get a little tap on the shoulder from my spirit guide, because that's the way in which, people can embrace what's going on. And my spirit guide says, you need to take authority over this and do it soon. So I'm basically in a room full of people that most likely have a different paradigm than I have, and that's okay. So I go, okay, this is going to sound really weird, guys, but I'm going to pray and I'm going to do it now. And there wasn't this long-winded deal. It was just to go, Father, if there are forces which are blocking this whole thing from happening, please break your power and do it soon. So Dr. Matriciana kind of looks up and glares at me. He takes the wand, he's going over like this. Well, maybe a minute, maybe 2 at the most pass. All of a sudden, the implant comes out of nowhere like this. Just like, boom. And everybody goes,
really? It just appeared.
Oh, it was unbelievable. It just appeared out of nowhere. Everybody goes, oh my gosh, what's that? And Matriciani goes, that's the implant. This is all on film. And he's got his wand and he's tapping it, looking at it, and putting it back on the leg. Well, Richard Shaw and I are looking at each other. We're just cracking up because, stuff, we just witnessed something. So we got the implant out. 2 days later, we're at the SEAL lab with Dr. Roger. And, Roger and I would go back and forth about all this stuff. And it would just, I miss him terribly. He's in all of our Watchers films. He's just a great guy. And so I said, Raj, can I talk to you privately out in the hall? So he goes out in the hall. And I go, I hope you understand what happened in that operating theater. Eyes got really big. He looked at me and said, L.A., I now believe that there's a supernatural component to the abduction phenomena and I'm going to tell Whitley about it because he was close to Whitley Strieber. So he died within, I don't know, we went, Richard and I went to Peru.
Yeah.
We filmed there. We came back. He was gone, just like that.
Yeah, it's a shame. That's a fascinating story, and I confess I did not know that element of it. I knew that you'd been engaged in the implant phenomenon with Roger. Thank you for sharing that with me. Personally, I think that, yes, that, I mean, I will just say I have a belief in the power of prayer myself. Not something I always had in my earlier years. I mean, I'll firmly say that, but it's something I've developed. And I don't doubt what you say whatsoever. And I mean, it's obviously been proven on film, but I'm just saying it sounds credible to me on many levels. But whether these beings are interdimensional or not is another question. I mean, they could be. To me, if they're from another dimension, ultimately they're still able to come to this dimension physically as biological or technological beings. And so, in my view of it, is like where they're exactly from. Is it from another planet or another dimension? Is somewhat secondary in my view. It could be either. Both are valid hypotheses. I tend to still feel that an interplanetary explanation has a little bit less baggage in my view, but I could be wrong, and I freely admit that. I mean, it could be, and there definitely are things where you can see these beings know how to manipulate space and time in ways that we don't.
Exactly.
And so does that mean dimensions? Like, do we really even understand what a dimension is? Like, I'm going to tell you, I don't really think I can wrap my brain. What is another dimension?
Right.
People talk about this all the time. Do they really know what they're even talking about? But I can acknowledge that there are other dimensions. Okay. I just don't know what they are. My brain's not good enough for that. So maybe that's where they're from. But they're able to interact here. And the thing about the abductions and the lack of permission, I totally agree with you on that. Of course, there are many encounters where people will have a very negative reaction to it. And I mean, let's just say there are many encounters where people will have what they feel is a very positive experience. That's absolutely out there. And it very much colors someone's attitude about what we are dealing with. The one thing that I try to remind myself of, and maybe other people when they want to listen, the messages that people get from these ETs frequently are things like, "We love you. You are special.
You're special."
And I just think, you're a big 6-foot-tall insect-looking guy. You're going to tell me you love me?
Yeah, right.
Like, you really love me? You really do that? Why? I liken it to the ultimate bad boyfriend, who says to his girlfriend, "Hey, baby, sure, I love you." And then he's gone the next day. That's what they sound like. It sounds like manipulation to me. It sounds like cognitive infiltration, cognitive manipulation. And, we had so many instances where they seem to be able to control our levels of pain. They can. How many stories have I read where they'll touch your head when you're in agony? They touch your head and it goes away.
Right.
They know how to do that. They know how to calm people down. They're very good at that. So they have a mastery of human cognition beyond what we have. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad or evil. Maybe they're using this for what they feel is a good purpose. But the fact is, we don't know. I don't know. And I'm not really willing just to trust and say, "Oh, yeah, whatever you guys want to do." One thing that I never hear anyone discussing in this field is the vast sheer quantity of sightings worldwide every week, almost every day, really. I think there's many thousands every year that never get reported. There are thousands that do, but there are so many that don't. This is global. There is an infrastructure involved here. There's so much dramatic activity happening around the world, and no one is asking, "Hey, what are these guys doing?" I'd like to know.
I'd like to know, too.
I'm obsessed by that question. What are they doing?
That segues perfectly into the question I was going to ask you. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with this, but I'll throw it out to you. in the guidebook of the supernatural, which is what I call the Bible, in Genesis 3:15, there's this little vignette, and there's this, saying that comes down, and I believe it's the pre-incarnate Christ who's there, and he says to the dragon, and Adam and Eve are also there, and this whole thing it's a 3-hour conversation because Gary Stearman calls it the dragon trap, and I concur with him. So this is all it's been deliberately set up this way. But if it's the pre-incarnate Christ, which is what I believe it is, he looks at the dragon, he says, your seed, your offspring, will be at enmity, at war with the offspring of the woman. The one coming from the woman will crush your head, you will bruise his heel. Well, 3 chapters later, you get the influx of the Watcher Angels coming down on Mount Hermon. By the way, folks, I'll be there next week lecturing on top of Hermon about the 200 Watcher Angels which descended, but I digress. But they come down and they create an oath. They have sex with the women and they create this hybrid entity known as the Nephilim. Well, okay, get that. Most people understand that. What most people don't understand or don't see is much thousands of years later, there's this guy Daniel, who's a prophet. He's being visited also by an angelic entity who tells him, Dan, I'm paraphrasing obviously, seal up the words in this book. So that book is sealed. Seal up the words. And he goes, people will read this, I'm paraphrasing, but they're not really going to grasp it. And then he gives us what I call a supernatural clue. Men and women will run to and fro over the face of the earth, knowledge will increase. So if you go 2,500 years ago to Gutenberg, it's basically a flat line. Monks in scriptoriums are copying everything on vellum, longhand. You got Gutenberg and all that. That's an explosion of knowledge, and people can read things. And then from there, once we hit the Industrial Revolution, everything just spikes, and now we're in modernity. And as we speak, men and women are running to over the face of the earth. So we're in the window of time that entity told Daniel, you can unseal the book now. In chapter 2, in verse 43 in particular, he says something which is my wheelhouse completely. And he says that their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not cleave to them. Who are they? Their seed will mingle with the seed of men. So I look at this whole thing from this ancient prophetic text, and this is what's going on with the breeding program, because in our 4th film, I'll send you some private links once we're done this. I'll send you some price, so you can, if you want to, you can peruse some of them. But there are 2 men, 2 women. All of them were taken. All of them, the men, sperm taken. Karen had 3 children by them. And in the 3rd month of pregnancy, she's re-abducted, they take the baby, and the rest is history. And,
they're saying that children will not cleave to them, so that would be the abductee children against the hybrids.
No, men, their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not cleave to them. So there's no cleave as a marriage contract.
I see. Okay, thanks
so there's
for explaining.
so I'm sorry about that. So there's no marriage. They're just mixing the seed and getting what they want. And that's what they do over and over and over again. So I maintain what we're looking at is this, and I know Dr. David Jacobs, I've interviewed him several times. I know Dr. David Jacobs believes in this, that they are creating hybrid entities as some sort of a takeover. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that I do think there's a hybrid program going on. I agree that David was correct there. My only quibble with David was I don't think that his analysis was the full story of what is going on, but I do think that he has highlighted a significant part of it. And he would probably agree with that, and he would just say, yeah, but what he's looking at is the most important part of it. And maybe that is true. So I think that I'm on board with the idea that there has been the creation of hybrids. I think there's too many accounts that are credible to me. It's interesting that, you're looking at this through the perspective of ancient biblical prophecy. I don't really know what I think about that at this time, but I will say it's very interesting. And you got me wondering about that particular prophecy. Here's one thing. I mean, I started out looking at UFOs 30 years ago, at nice black hair I had hope in my eyes. If you look carefully, you could see it there. It was all there. And I had a very different attitude. I was ultra like nuts and bolts, just the facts. I wanted to know about really only the modern aspects of the UFO phenomenon. But over time, if you have a curious mind, you want to ask important questions, you start looking for different connections. And that's what I've been doing since I've started. And it's a big, big, complex rabbit hole. And the other thing that I really have come to understand is this reality that we find ourselves in is a vastly more complex thing than my puny mind really has the ability to understand.
I agree.
This I can just say. So, maybe what you're saying is right on. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, sometimes at conferences I'll look at the audience and I'll go, and I'll show a picture of the universe and I'll say, no one knows what this is or where we are in it, and no one does. I mean, and the analogy is, if planet Earth is in, if the United States is analogous to the universe, is planet Earth in Duluth, Dallas, New York? We have no idea where we are, what this is. So
we always think we've got it. We always think we've got it. This may be appropriate for me very quickly. I know our time is limited, but when I was about 20, a long time ago, I went through a period where I was an atheist. And I just said, we only believe in God because we're afraid of dying and all these other reasons I'd cooked up. And so, but I had a dog. I was 20, and I was feeding my dog his meal. I took a can of dog food out of the cupboard. And the dog, he's watching me, because he knows exactly what's happening. He knows he's going to get fed. I see his tail going crazy. And I'm watching him eat, and I'm thinking to myself, I got a smart dog. But there's a few things he doesn't know. He doesn't know how the food got into that can of dog food, because he's a dog. How's a dog going to know that? And a lot of other things a dog doesn't know. Many things he doesn't know, because he's a dog. You don't expect a dog to know the things we know. And I thought, gee, Richard, you think you're so smart. Dog's here. You're here. What's here? What's there? What's there?
Exactly.
And I realized for me at that moment to think, there's no such thing as a transcendental reality, something that I can't quite understand. How arrogant, how foolish. So from that point, I've tried to be open to, anything that persuades me. And I still try to be very evidence-based, but I can see you are as well. And, there are a lot of possibilities out there. So I keep my mind open to all of them. And that includes forms of communication that seem to go beyond normal space-time boundaries. You're talking about prophecy. I'm married to a remote viewer, and I'm quite conversant with what remote viewing is. It's simply, you can think of it as psychic spies. CIA used them. They're still around. There's techniques. They are real, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
And a lot of those remote viewers, they also will perceive things that go beyond ordinary space and ordinary time. Like, to me, there's no argument with that. So I look at some of these ancient forms of divination as maybe they're comparable.
Interesting. I was sort of put a bow on this thing, and I realized we could do shows till the cows come home here about all this, because it's you can just go from subject to subject within.
No, I can tell. Like, we definitely could.
Talking shop here. But there's a scenario that, once again, the late David Flynn and I talked about before he passed away. And if I were to go back 4 or 5 years ago, that scenario would not play out, because things weren't adding up to that. But now they are. And I'll start by saying this, that when Nagasaki and Hiroshima happened, that's when they started showing up in ways that we've never seen. So the whole, Arnold and the fly over the Capitol, and then Roswell, and all this stuff happens within that window of time and the cover-up. But there's a scripture, which a couple of them, which I've just put together fairly recently this year, which leads me to believe that, maybe we're looking at something. One of them is when Jesus casts out the demons from the man of the tombs, and this guy's demon possessed, and there's legion, and they look at him and they go,
Familiar with it?
yeah. He goes, they go, well, what have you come to do before? It's not our time yet. It's like, why are you here? It's not our time. I mean, you can't throw us into the abyss yet. It's not our time. How do they know that? I mean, it's like, wow. Why are they challenging Jesus? This isn't our time. We're not ready to go.
He sent them into the swine. The herd
He
of
sent
swine,
them to the swine.
But I didn't really think about that. It's not our time.
But then
so what do you suggest?
I'm leading up to it. So, when Michael and his angels fight with the dragon and his angels, and I call it the Great Eviction Notice, and the dragon is booted out of a second heaven, woe to the inhabitants of earth. The dragon has come down to you, and he knows his time is short. How does he know his time is short? How does he know that? How can he possibly know that? So with those two scriptures, I kind of went, what if they know that they can reveal themselves? There's going to be some sort of a nuclear event on the planet. Hear me out. I want to get your thoughts on this. So 4 or 5 years ago, like I prefaced this question with, we weren't seeing saber rattling with nukes. I mean, you had Rocket Man over there firing stuff, but I mean, nothing like what we're seeing now, where Ukraine and the Russians and Europe, they're all talking about tactical nukes and all this. It's like, have you guys lost?
The Westerners are talking all about it. Yeah.
I mean, have you lost your collective minds? I mean, what are you people doing? And so
they have.
Yeah,
they actually
I agree.
have lost.
I mean, it's like, so you plug in Robert Salas to this. There he is, 9 intercontinental ballistic missiles. We broke that story in our Watchers thing. He came to us, and because all the other programs wouldn't let him edit it, so we said, yeah, we'll show you the edit before we go with it. If you give us thumbs up, we'll go. If you want something changed, we'll change it. So he came with us. We broke the story, Richard Shaw and I, in our Watchers series. He was very emotional, by the way. Very emotional.
Yeah, I believe it.
And, the Salas story is he's the base commander in Maelstrom and 60-foot whatever UFO over the gate. 9 intercontinental ballistic missiles are shut down. That's unprecedented. So they seem to be obsessed. So here's the scenario. What if we get a nuclear event on the planet? We are now completely connected via the satellite network that surrounds the globe. Everybody's connected. I mean, heck, even in the Amazon, some guy in a canoe's got a cell phone. It's unbelievable. So everyone's wired together and linked up. You get a nuke going off in this day and age. It's not Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Even if it's a tactical nuke, the satellites can show all the carnage, all the stuff, and people are going to be terrified. I mean, in my opinion, it would create the greatest collective fear that humanity has ever experienced together. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, you get an EMP out of that, which would probably disable a massive amount of our electronics. And then we're cooked, literally and figuratively.
Yep, I agree.
So I think I cut you off before you finished your
that's
point here.
So the question is, if it's not an EMP and all this stuff is still working, let's say, we're all watching this just like we watched the tidal wave come into Fukushima, for crying out loud. We're watching this. Mankind is terrified. Then that's the perfect time for the Space Brothers to come back and go, hey, we genetically manipulated early man. We created all life on this planet. We started the world's religions and civilizations. Now at this critical juncture, we're back to usher mankind into its golden age. Is that a viable scenario in your opinion?
I mean, I guess it could happen. I don't know. I mean, it's.
How do you think disclosure happens?
I don't think it's going to happen in an honest way in my lifetime. I think it's not going to. I think that there's a similar theory about a false flag. Yours is interesting. And that's not one that I've really thought about. The more common false flag scenario, people might talk about Project Blue Beam.
Right.
Basically, a fake alien invasion to scare people to death. Go run into mama, run to papa, the government, to protect us from the aliens. And for all kinds of reasons, I do not believe that. But what I've often said is, if there were to be an alien invasion like that, false flag. I just don't think that's going to happen. But what you're saying is, I guess, I don't really know how to predict the likelihood of that type of thing, that including a nuclear devastation, and then in the aftermath, aliens coming to save mankind, as it were. I don't know. I mean, all I can say is that if there is a nuclear catastrophe, and if I'm able to survive it, and there are aliens and who present themselves to save us, I will very likely be quite suspicious of that, of the motivation. The thing that I look at these aliens, I call them extraterrestrials, as I mean, I'm aware that we may look at this a little differently. I don't know if I see them as demonic entities. So I tend to look at them as beings maybe like us, with their own interests, their own desires, their own realpolitik as well. I don't see them as angelic. I don't see them as morally superior to us. I don't know if I see them as morally inferior either. I see them as beings that, like us, are used to getting their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're human beings. We run the planet. We round up the plants. We round up the animals. We're like, you're working for us now. Cows, we're going to start eating you. Pigs, ditto. Chickens, we don't even think twice. We have our pets. We take care of them, but we control them because we're used to getting our way. We're the apex predators of the planet.
That's right.
And I believe that any species that comes here from elsewhere, they are also apex predators. And that means they're also used to getting their own way, which means they may be cooperative like us. They may be competitive like us too. And the question is, to what degree, like, do our interests differ from theirs? To what degree do our interests coincide with theirs? I mean, I try to think of them in the grand scheme of classical geopolitics, as I do with politics on this planet. I tend to look at them from the same perspective. And so, which means, I suppose it could be possible to cooperate, but I also believe it's quite possible that they are going to have interests that are not the same as ours necessarily. And so I think we need to be wise to that. I guess that's my attitude about it at this point.
Well, I mean, we could do more shows, and I hope that you would come back, and we'll do another run.
Oh, yeah.
But
Happy to.
that was just fantastic, folks. There you have it. Richard, before you leave, tell us how to get a hold of your books and where you're going to be speaking next, please.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I have a bunch of books on UFO history, 2 volumes of UFOs in the national security state. You mentioned earlier AD After Disclosure, which I co-authored years ago. I have a book, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. I have other books out there. I'm working on a book on a history of USOs, underwater UFO phenomena. It's quite large already, and I am very excited on it. I have a website called Richard Dolan Members. There's free stuff there. There's member stuff on there. You can go check it out, richarddolanmembers.com. I have a YouTube channel called Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure. And I just do what I do. I feel like the luckiest guy I know. I love researching this crazy, maddening subject that is by far the most, it could be annoying, but it's never boring.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. Well, Richard Dolan, everybody, thanks for watching, and it's great. Just remember, before you go, hit the subscribe button. UFOs are real, they're burgeoning, and not going away. We'll see you here soon. Thanks for watching.